add value to your business, or do you want to just be this administrative person?
And often, if you look at your talent team and the caliber of talent in your company, they correlate.
You could hire the best person for the job if they were in your candidate pool.
All these individual employees, one by one, together, their voices all come together to articulate the culture of the company.
We are dealing with technology that is meeting people at one of the most vulnerable points in their entire life.
We're going to dive into what buzzwords have made it to best practices and more on this week's Hiring on All Cylinders. Listeners, commuters, fellow HR and talent enthusiasts, it gives me great joy to explain once again why your soon-to-be-consumed podcast has that slight din in the background of murmurs, voices, and the occasional PA announcement. Damn you, PA announcers. That's because Hiring on All Cylinders is back to the airwaves from our own booth, number 1342 at the HR Tech 2018 Conference and Expo, located here at the Venetian in Las Vegas. These podcasts are being recorded over the span of a few days, and will then be released out to the wild to you, our faithful followers, throughout the next few months. Our first guest of the conference, I might pose the question to the audience and you cannot answer, so I will go ahead and answer for you, is Sarah Brennen. Sarah is the founder and chief advisor at Accelir, an advisory firm improving experiences for candidates, employees, and customers as we move towards the future of work. She was previously a practitioner all over the place, but let's see, other places like Burson, Cornerstone On Demand, Clear Company, the list goes on. So Sarah, it's so good to have you, and thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So lucky enough, it's not just me by myself sitting in this booth talking to our wonderful guest, Sarah, but I have our Chief Marketing Officer, Mike Trigg, joining me as well. Mike, thanks so much for sticking around.
Of course. Happy to be here and excited to get HR Tech 2018 kicked off.
It blows my mind that we're already back at HR Tech.
Well, it's early this year.
I know.
So it's a month earlier than normal, which has kind of thrown me off a bit. I'm used to it being in October.
Yep.
So the temperatures are incredibly hot.
Warm.
If you are not here, this is serious. It's like 103 degrees outside.
Yeah, I had to brave and get in an Uber and go to like a store off the strip and was like, I don't know if I could do this. I'm melting. I'm not used to that.
Yeah.
My Wisconsin blood is like, no.
So, okay, come out from Wisconsin. How long have you been out in Vegas for so far?
I came in on Monday. So
Awesome.
I have no idea what day it is at this
It's
point.
only
I think it's
Tuesday.
only Tuesday.
Amazingly.
I've already been to 3 conferences literally this week and spoken at 2 of them. So it has been a long event already this week.
And we're just getting started.
And we're just getting started. The fun. I mean, the Expo Hall is my absolute favorite part of this entire show. Like, I love this.
And as you said, when you walk in the first day, before the Expo Hall is even officially open, there's a palpable buzz. Everybody's excited, eager to talk about and demo their latest and greatest stuff. So there's an energy in the air here.
It is, and it's fun. You know, I've been 15, 16 of these shows. I've come as a practitioner. As you mentioned, I used to work for vendors. So I'm a former chief strategy officer. So I used to run marketing and product for some of the vendors. I've come in that capacity. I've come as an analyst and an advisor to companies. And so I've kind of seen this from all perspectives. And it doesn't matter who you are. The first night is always so exciting. And people just are so happy to be here, and it could be because First Night always has free booze at all the booths.
That helps. That definitely helps.
But it also is. It's just there's so much, and the Expo Hall this year is huge. It's amazing.
It's bigger than last year. I feel like
it's much bigger.
Yeah. It's almost overwhelming. But the good news is there are clearly marked avenues and streets that you can walk down, and we happen to be located right next to the Pitch Fest Theater, so it's a nice little
high traffic area.
Exactly.
My type A OCD-ness is incredibly happy with how organized this is this year. It's so great.
No kidding. And so 16 years, that is so much HR tech to have consumed. What have you seen change? Like, I'm jumping ahead, I'm sorry, but
no,
16 years jumped out at me. So,
well, I clearly started coming when I was 10.
Exactly, yes, makes sense.
As we all did.
You know, I think one of the things when I very first started coming to HR Tech is it really was an enterprise show. It was for full suite enterprise technologies and a couple of the products that supported those larger technologies. And there was a period of time where this event was held on Navy Pier in Chicago, like a very small venue, really. And what I've seen really evolve is we're starting to see a number of startups are coming and companies that are doing point solutions and a ton of recruiting. It took a long time for recruiting vendors to actually start attending this show, and even longer for recruiting practitioners, right, to start coming and attending the show. And so it's been really interesting kind of to see that evolution away from it being just 5 or 6 big companies that ran the show to, I don't even know how many vendors. There's 80 new products being announced today.
That's
like
incredible.
80 new products or features or any of those. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, you touched on the presence of recruiting vendors at this show. That's an area I know that you've focused on, as well as the future of work overall. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and the research you've done.
Yeah, so like I said, I've worked in a lot of different capacities, and over the last 8 to 10 years, I've really spent a lot of that time focused on trying to improve the space for the people that work in this space. And I do that on a couple of different fronts. For practitioners, I do a little bit of consulting work, but really what my goal is to help make sure they have the education. I do that. I have HR Tech blog is mine. I'm a co-founder of the Women of HR blog. I am a contributor on Fistful of Talent. I think there's not enough conversation of both the technology, but also the practices, the best practices, the future practices, in a way that can be easily consumable. There's a lot of marketing speak out there. There's a lot of content that's trying to explain things way more difficult because they need to be fancy. Like, you don't have to be fancy, you just have to explain it in a way for people to understand. And so that, for most people, is how they know me, is through content curation, content writing, and that on social media. I'm So Sarah. Which people are always really disappointed when they meet me in person, because because I'm a natural introvert, and so
you just tweeted about that. You're like, okay, I have my 1 hour on stage.
So I have to go do an hour of alone time, right?
Decompression.
And decompression, so I can do the rest of this tonight. And so, there's that side of it. On the other side, the way that I really help improve experiences and prepare for the future of work is improving the technology that's out there. And so I've worked with well over 100 vendors in the space to improve their product roadmap, the user experience, even just how they're doing positioning and talking to vendors, how they're selling. Like, it's good and bad, but sometimes it's as simple as teaching them about HR, right? Helping them understand recruiting, helping them understand HR, so that they can be better partners to the people they're selling products to. Because you're not just selling products, and what we do in HR tech isn't just about HR. It touches every single person, and recruiting especially. We are dealing with technology that is meeting people at one of the most vulnerable points in their entire life. And so if we aren't focused on making that candidate experience really positive, if we aren't focused on making the recruiting experience from a technology perspective as good as it possibly can be, so they could spend their energy with the humans involved instead of with the technology, we're all failing. Like, we just need to do better as people for people. You touched on buzzwords a second ago. At an event like this, you certainly see a lot of buzzwords. Buzzword abuse, I call it.
The cloud, predictive analytics.
Exactly. AI, etc. But with your perspective, and we had a chance to chat a little bit before the podcast started here, I'd love to get your view on, what's gone from buzzword to best practice. What's really become, more than lived up to the hype, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, I think a couple of, especially for recruiting, I'll start with there, because I think that's where we started seeing a lot of buzzwords come into play early. And we've proven that out. I think employment branding was one that for a long time we got a lot of pushback on, because it was like, who cares? We now can start looking at research on the effects of employment branding, not on hiring, but on retention. We could look at the effects of it on customer satisfaction rates. Within healthcare, we could look at it on patient satisfaction rates. If you're in healthcare, you know why that's important, because your federal funding comes in part by your patient satisfaction scores. And we've been able to have enough time to go back and start looking at how all of these things are really interconnected now. And it all comes back to the perception at the very beginning before they even apply. Candidate experience, another one, really nice, fuzzy buzzword. And I was part of the Candidate Experience Awards from the very first year and used to sit on the talent board with them. And, again, it's one of those things where if we're doing our jobs right, it's not about necessarily candidate experience and being fluffy. It's that the technology is working correctly, and more importantly, our process is correct. And if we have a good process, we automatically have good candidate experience. We also have good hiring manager experience. We have good recruiter experience. And again, overall, at the end of the day, it comes back to business outcomes. None of this is just to make people feel better. It all comes down to how's the impact on business, right? Hiring, but also revenue and profitability and growth and all of these other areas. I think some of the other, from a technology perspective, CRM for sure is really, really key and was kind of a buzzword and people didn't really understand. And, now we see the real value of it. And sourcing, right? I mean,
near and dear to our hearts.
Near and dear to your hearts. I remember when we were getting, you guys might not even remember these days, but we would go through something called AIRS training, and you would become a certified internet recruiter.
Yeah.
And you had to learn to source and screen and
so
flip
quaint,
and X-ray. And
Boolean,
I remember going into my a court office, rented office with 40 other people with rented computers, and you had to go through your testing and training to get in the process.
Certification.
You had to get certified in this, and so long ago.
Yeah.
I think maybe they're still doing it, but the way I did it was, and so sourcing was kind of this for some companies that are doing these really specialized types of things, where sourcing really, that buzzword has evolved into pipelining, right?
Yeah.
It's being prepared for the future. Again, it's taking what we're doing in recruiting and tying it to business outcomes to make sure we are a strategic partner of business, not a partner just of HR.
So one of the big trends that we were chatting about right before this show in talent acquisition has really been this shift where 10, 20, 30 years ago, your outbound recruiting of passive candidates was reserved for really your executive level roles, maybe a few of your really high skilled roles. And we're now seeing that trickle down into more mid-skilled positions, truck drivers and nurses and things that you might not think of, things that you're doing outbound recruiting for, but increasingly organizations aren't getting enough qualified applicants as inbound active candidates. Have you seen that trend with some of the clients you've worked with, and how are they dealing with that?
Yeah, what we're seeing even beyond that, the blue collar shortage, manufacturing, especially in the Midwest, this is a huge issue, and they're actually skipping and going all the way down to the high school levels. And they're starting to put in education programs because they can't figure out, there's not even enough people coming in to get those, so they could do all the outbound sourcing they want. If there's no talent, right? If there's no pool there, there's no pool there. And so there's some really interesting programs where they're actually going in, starting at the high school level, even middle school level, just to at least introduce some of this, working and helping develop some STEM programs and some other pieces. But at the high school level, 10th grade, 11th grade, going in and offering kids summer jobs, really basic type of summer jobs. One of the biggest challenges they're having is, though, they're having to do meetings with parents because there's a fear from parents of what if my kid doesn't go to college.
Right.
And so we have shifted and actually created a generation of a skills gap and of a shortage out of some of these fears. And so on the corporate side, what they're doing is actually going in and working to do sourcing of 15, 16-year-olds, offering, we'll pay your 2-year tech school as long as you're giving us 20 hours a week of work, and we guarantee you a job when you graduate.
It's almost like a GI Bill for those.
Exactly. And so, people are getting really creative, and I think one of the things that we make the mistake of doing as we talk about the research and trends and all of this is a lot of what we do is only focused on white collar, college educated, a lot of time technical people. when we have a huge number of recruiters, we have a huge number of companies that are struggling to fill roles that do not fit in that mold, that might be the easy one for us to be. It's the clean and the easy and the pretty one to talk about.
Absolutely.
What are you finding is, what are those organizations finding is their biggest challenge as they start, doing active outbound recruiting for, what might have been 1% of their roles in the past is now 10%, 20%, 50% of their roles. How are they keeping up with that?
They're struggling to keep track of it, right? And that's where sourcing technology, that's where CRM technology, talent pipelining has really come into play. And companies that are starting to look at that, it has to be managed differently than your traditional ATS because they aren't applicants. And they don't always need full-blown recruitment marketing campaigns, right? And so I think that's the other thing. A lot of people get afraid of doing pipelining or CRM or sourcing outreach because in their mind that means they also have to be sending out a weekly newsletter and all of these other touch points that there were people at conferences 5 years ago that were like, no, this is what this means. But we have found as the market has evolved that some of it now is just keeping in touch once in a while. Yeah. And so it's having a way to be able to not only just find, but connect and create meaningful connections with them, not just giving them more email spam.
Yeah, it gets back to, recruiting is a human profession.
Correct.
It kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier on. You having to craft messages that get rid of the jargon and can be communicated clearly.
Understood,
right.
yeah.
And it's crazy that in recruiting even, we have to do that.
I know.
At the end of the day, it's all about a person and a person connecting about a large shift in their lives.
Right.
And so if you can make it so it's cleaner and easier to keep track of, i.e. your CRMs, your sourcing solutions, then all of a sudden you don't have to be worried about, did this person get sent a marketing campaign message? Did this person actually apply 3 years ago for a different department? And it should make so much sense and should just be done, and yet here we are talking about it again.
I know. 10 years. I feel like I've been talking about the exact same thing for 10 years. I think what it's really important at a show like HR Tech to understand is what all great technology should do is facilitate you being more human in your role as a recruiter. For instance, right, the technology should be able to take the place of the part of the job that isn't really adding as much value. It's part of the job that's important, has to get done, but it's not the key relationship. The CRM isn't your relationship with that candidate. It's your means to be able to have the time to have that relationship. Sourcing tools aren't taking away, anything about your job other than helping you identify and source and screen them faster, right? And so it's allowing us really to do twice the amount of work in half the amount of time.
Yep. It's a huge efficiency game.
It's a huge efficiency
for recruiters
game.
And I think that's why a lot of organizations implemented, pure sourcers in the first place, is they wanted to offload that, more menial work.
Yeah.
Now you can offload a lot of that work through technology.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it really is a game changer.
So we, I think, have time for only one more question.
Okay.
Sadly, unfortunately, that's kind of when we try to cram in so many meetings, it inevitably comes to this. But Sarah, we'll have to get you back on for another conversation because this is way too good. So I guess in your kind of perspective, what are a few ways we can expect the workplace to change as the adoption of some of these solutions, CRMs, sourcing solutions, also this, everywhere ubiquitous AI that people keep talking about? Where do you see the workplace going in the future?
I think one of the big shifts that we're going to have to see before we really see the workplace of the future come into play is people are going to have to look at the reason why they're making the changes. I think one of the things that we've seen, and we see AI is at 70% of the booths. The number of them that actually have AI is probably 20%.
Yeah.
There's some misinformation, around a lot of these buzzwords kind of connecting back, but what's really going to have to change before anything else is people need to first stop and take a look at their processes and the reason why they're doing things. And if something is broken, trying to understand that before they continue to throw more technology. I think we've been in a cycle for the last 3 to 4 years where people have just been buying technology, and adding more and more and more on. I have seen corporate clients with as much as 47 different recruiting specific products that they had contracts on. And it still wasn't working. But the reason it still wasn't working was because the fundamental issue was never being addressed and solved. And I think for the future of work is, as simple as it sounds, the biggest shift we're going to see is that people are going to start focusing back on people and using the technology to supplement and support that, not to do it for them.
Yeah, the people and the process. I think that's another big part of it that can often be overlooked is what is our overall recruiting process and how does the technology enable that process that we want rather than interfere with it. So.
The experience side, right? Everything else everywhere around us, from how we use our iPhones to how we can now watch TV, how we listen to music with Spotify, everything else has been crafted around experiences. Alexa, right? It's all about our experience. And so for work, we're going to have to shift how we experience work, how we experience applying, how we experience being engaged, how we experience having conversations with our leaders as we move to a more remote workforce, how we experience development. Everything around that is going to be shifting and changing, and that is going to be the real change. It isn't necessarily one bit of technology or this doing that. It's the bigger picture of just the experience and the perspective that is going to have the biggest impact on future of work.
I can't agree more. So I guess in that theme, I'll say, hey, Alexa, remind me to have Sarah Brennan back on the podcast sometime in the future.
Well stated.
Yeah, this has been a blast. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
To the rest of the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sarah.